Hey everybody, in today's video I finally get to talk to you about the new Z-mount 800mm f6.3. So what I want to do in this video is talk to you about the different aspects of this lens, what it looks like on the outside, the weight, that type of stuff. Is it really as small and light as everybody thinks it is? And talk about the picture quality, what I've been doing with it over the past couple of months, how long I've had it, what I think of it, how it works with teleconverters, all those types of things. So there's lots to go over. So first of all, I've had this lens for a really long time. I actually got it the same time I got my 400 2.8, which was before the 400 2.8 was announced. So this is something that I've been shooting with in a number of different locations for a long period of time, and I've been incredibly impressed. Throughout this video, I'll talk to you about the things that I really like. I will talk to you about some things that I don't like, and then hopefully try and give you an idea if this is a lens that you might want to buy yourself, or whether or not it's worthwhile you having a lens like this, or maybe it's worthwhile looking at other lenses that are available for Z-mount cameras. First of all, the lens itself. As I mentioned, it's an 800mm, it's an f6.3. It's a lens that's called PF, or Nikon has referred to their lenses as PF lenses in the past. This is one of the f-mount PF lenses. The idea of a PF lens, I'm going to keep this really nice and simple. If anybody wants a really complicated video on PF lenses, I can make one, but for a really simple video, a PF element allows the lens to be much smaller than it would be on a normal kind of 500mm lens or a normal 800mm lens. The 500mm f5.6 PF is a lens that's been incredibly well received for f-mount photographers, and this is the first PF lens that will be available for Z-mount shooters. So the 800mm f6.3 PF, and just for those of you that are unaware, it will actually tell you what PF stands for, and it will say it on the lens barrel itself. So on the lens barrel it will say phase Fresnel, which is what PF stands for. There are some trade-offs when it comes to using a PF lens, and we'll talk about some of those as we get onto image quality and stuff, but I've been blown away by the quality of this lens, the performance of this lens. Don't think that because it's a PF lens, it's not as good as like the high-end pro lenses like a 400 2.8 or anything like that. It's not. This isn't a second category lens. This is a primary 800mm lens that you could use as a main 800. I would happily replace an 800 5.6 with an 800 6.3 as long as you didn't mind that aperture difference. So it does have built-in VR. It will also make use of the VR in the body of the camera as well. So if you're using this with a Z6, Z7, Z5, Z6 II, Z7 II, or a Z9, you will also make use of the in-body stabilization and VR in the lens together. The design of the lens is very similar to what we saw initially with the 400mm 2.8. So there's nothing that kind of really stands out here as new in terms of the design. We have obviously got that gold ring back like we did on the 400 2.8. And we also then have function buttons, so these buttons around the side of the barrel. We also then have a function ring. We also then have a manual focusing ring. We then have a foot on the lens, and this is a fixed foot. So you can remove the foot itself, but you cannot remove the collar. Now the collar will turn and twist all the way around, but the collar itself will not physically remove from the lens. You can't do that. Inside the collar bolt, you will find a Kensington lock. This is obviously something that Nikon are adding to all generally their high-end stuff, so that you can secure it in busy locations, especially if you're a sports photographer, for example. So this foot can be removed, but the collar can't. The foot is not Arca Swiss. I know that I'm going to get that question a lot, but you can remove it and replace it with an Arca Swiss foot if you wanted to. Interestingly, the foot does have a kind of padded fake leather grip on the inside of the foot, so when you're holding it, it's kind of like an anti-slip grip, which is quite nice, especially if you do hold your lens from that when you're walking with it or traveling with it, and if it's in your hand, you're generally holding it from the foot of the lens. In terms of controls and buttons on the lens, we do have a lens function button right at the back of the lens, which can be customized. You can assign that to a number of different things. We then have two switches, and those of you that are used to previous long lenses would have been used to having loads of different switches on the lens, but on this 800, we only have two switches. We have a manual focus and auto-focusing switch, and we also then have a distance focusing switch. So you can either set this to full focusing distance, or you can set it to 10 meters to infinity. On the other side, we also then have a memory set button. So if you do want to use that memory set function, for those of you that are unaware, that allows you to store a particular focus position. So you might have a position that a subject comes in to land on a perch, for example. You can store that as a focus position, push the button, lens jumps back to that focus position, and you know that your subject is in focus. I've not actually really been using that on these newer lenses because I've been relying on the autofocus of the Z9. I've not really had to save or store focus positions, but for those of you that do use that, that is always a feature that's appreciated. This lens will take filters, and it's placed at the back of the lens. So we have an internal filter ring at the back of the lens that's removable. This is a new design that was added in with the 400 2.8, and it allows you to use 46mm filters. They'll attach into this little ring. You can then pop that ring back in and then close that down, and away you go. And I suppose one of the things that a lot of people are going to want to know about is what this lens is like when it comes to teleconverters. So yes, you can use the Z-mount teleconverters, the 1.4 and the 2 times. Both of them will work on this lens. In terms of their performance, we'll talk about that a little bit later. I do think that the 1.4 times is good. I'm not really that keen on the 2 times, but it's very rare that I need anything longer than 1,000 millimeters. So we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later. The biggest thing that you can't really see, and unfortunately I can't really convey this to you in a video, is its weight. An 800mm lens that is hand-holdable. I've not used this on any tripods or monopods or anything like that. In most scenarios, I'm using it handheld because of how lightweight it is. If I was doing video, then obviously I'm going to tripod mount it. So I have shot some video on this. But for handheld photography stuff, it's perfectly fine to just use this handheld. I can't stress to you how lightweight this is. There's nothing to it. I mean, I couldn't really do this with a standard 800mm f5.6. So this weighs just over 2.3 kilos or 2,300 grams. I will put the other measurement for everybody else up somewhere, but it's just over 2.3 kilos. To put that into perspective, the 800mm 5.6 was 4.5 kilos, so it's a lot lighter. It's nowhere near as heavy as you're used to for kind of older previous lenses. One of the things I just want to talk about that weight though is, yes, as a 800mm lens, as a prime lens, this is incredibly lightweight, and for those of you that like shooting at 800mm, it's amazing. But just to put that into perspective, I just want to be clear. I don't want to seem like I'm, making you think like it weighs a lot less than it actually is. So if we put that into perspective, so if we took a 500mm PF, and this is obviously an F mount and a 5.6. So if we added in a 1.4 times teleconverter, that would then take us to 700mm at f8. So this would be a 700mm f8. We would obviously then need to add in the FTZ. So 500mm, f1.4 teleconverter, FTZ. This would still weigh less, but it's a 700mm f8, not a 800mm 6.3. So I just want to be clear on that, put it into perspective that, if someone was trying to go for the lightest weight combination or setup of lenses that they could, then this isn't necessarily going to be the lightest combination, but the 500mm 5.6 PF could get you pretty close. However, the quality of that setup would not be the same. So it's a little bit heavier, but the quality of this setup is phenomenal. To some extent, the price point reflects that. I wouldn't think of anything less of using this as my main wildlife lens if I wanted to shoot all the time at 800. Where I am in the UK, I generally shoot a lot of small birds, small animals. It's very rare that I'm shooting anything larger than a deer. Or anything larger than small woodland birds in most cases. So 800mm for that is perfect. And I think that this 800 6.3 in terms of quality is the best quality you can get for the focal length. And I would even go as far as to say that I would probably choose this over that with a 2 times teleconverter. Obviously this with a 2 times teleconverter is initially a 400 2.8. You add the 2 times, it's then an 800mm, and it's an f5.6. So you get the advantage of extra light with this. That might change. So I'm willing to do a lot of testing between this and this with a 2 times teleconverter, but I do want to do a separate video on that. And again, the price difference is massive. Like, this 800mm lens versus that lens with a 2x teleconverter, that's a lot more expensive, and I feel like this would still be the choice for me. I've also taken some kind of size comparison shots against other lenses, so I can show you this lens against other lenses that you might have at home to give you an idea of its size. So in terms of the lens itself, I'm happy with the design. I'm happy that the gold ring is back. I'd probably say the only thing I don't like is where this manual focusing ring is positioned. I probably would have preferred the manual focusing ring here instead of the function ring here. So I would prefer the function ring to be further back, because on a lot of other lenses, a lot of other Z-mount lenses, the function ring is a little bit further back. And the manual focusing ring, I would prefer that to be here, because then it's a little bit more easy for me to access. I generally tend to have the weight of the lens foot in the palm of my hand, and then that leaves my fingers free to access these dials, and I have to readjust to go back to the manual focusing ring, which causes me problems. So if the manual focusing ring was here, I would much prefer that. It's not the end of the world. You can obviously customize what the function ring does, and to be honest, I'm not using manual focus all that often on this lens because I'm relying on the autofocus of the camera. Also, if I really wanted to, I could just move the foot out of the way, and obviously I can then just reposition my hand along the lens depending on where I need it to be. I suppose one thing that aids that as well is that this isn't very front heavy. So I can literally hold that at the back of the lens, and it's just all the weight still feels like it's here. It's not going to be a front heavy lens. The balance is really nice with a Z9 or a Z6 or a Z7 on the other side. There isn't really a massive amount of weight at the front. It's just balanced really nicely. If I could change one thing, if there's one thing I didn't like, it would be that manual focusing ring position. I would switch it to here, but it's not the end of the world. There's other things you could do, or just not use manual focus as well. One of the other things that I don't particularly like about this lens is the lens hood that it comes with. Yes, I think it does the job as a lens hood. It's very lightweight, but it is kind of almost like a thin plastic, and it does move a little bit. You can see as I'm putting tension on that, it's got a little bit of flex in the hood. I still think it does a job as a lens hood. The protection element is there. It's got this nice kind of rubber rim around the outside, so you can easily put it down onto a surface and it'll obviously protect your lens. It doesn't have a twist lock. It has this kind of clip that you push on, and it allows you to unlock the lens hood from the lens. Can be a little bit difficult to get used to, first of all, but once you know how it works, you're pretty much set to go. So the lens hood is okay. I would kind of want a little bit of a better lens hood for the price of the lens, but it is what it is. You do also get a really nice soft pouch. So this soft pouch will cover the front of the lens and the lens hood, and it has this little drawstring pull tab on it. So that will allow you to pop that into and cover the front of the lens. This is basically your lens cap. So it's a nice drawstring lens cap that will cover the front of the lens and the lens hood combined. Now you can either put that in your own bag, or you can put it in the bag that it comes in. So it comes in the same bag that you get with the 400 2.8. So I really like this bag actually. I think the design is nice. I think the little yellow zips are great. And I think the pockets on the side are really useful as well, because on the previous long lens bags, they were kind of like string elastic cases, and you just put things in and out. The zips are a lot more secure. So I'm happy with this bag. And it's a great way of traveling with this lens if you don't want to put it into another bag. But because of its size, you can easily put it into other bags with just a little lens cap on it, and it fits quite nicely. But if you did want to carry it in its own bag, then you can pop it in here and carry it in a nice separate padded case if you wanted to. Really nice hard foot. I like this case, and obviously the lens does come with this case. So that is quite nice that you do get it with that, because I was a little bit concerned that you might not, but you do. Same case that comes with the 400 2.8. Picture quality and video quality. As I mentioned, I've had this lens for, what's it now? 3 months, I think, and I've used it in a number of different locations for a number of different subjects, everything from wildlife, so small birds in flight. I've used it for stags, I've used it for sports, I've used it for people. So I'm going to run through some sample images, show you some of the example shots that you can take from this. Just keep in mind things that are going to be important to you, like depth of field. I appreciate that this is an f6.3, so some of you might want to know, what's that depth of field look like? What does what does that fall off look like? Is the subject in the foreground that's out of focus distracting? Is the background that's out of focus distracting? Have a look at those things. I've taken a lot of shots where I've got something dominant in the foreground out of focus, and then a main subject in focus in the background, to give you an idea of what the fall off is like on this lens. Because realistically, if you're shooting at these distances, there are going to be things that are in front of your subject. It's going to be very rare at 800mm that you're going to have a clean line of sight to your subject. So there are going to be other things in the foreground, there are going to be other things in the background. So I've tried to include as much of that as possible in the example shots that I've taken. So I'll show you some of the example shots, I'll show you some of the example video. I'll let you guys decide about what you think of the performance, what you think about the image quality of this lens. I really like it, but that's just my own personal opinion at this point. I do think it just requires a little bit more testing and a little bit more comparison with the 400 2.8. But I think this is the lens that I'm probably going to use most for pretty much all of my wildlife photography going forward, that is obviously of a meaningful distance. As I said, I mainly shoot small subjects at longer distances, so the 800mm is perfect for that. One other thing that's worth mentioning about video performance of this lens, video-wise, the quality is, again, it just looks amazing. Now, focus breathing, the lens does focus breathe, and you can see that as I'm showing you here. Now, I appreciate that if you are videoing, you might not be shooting a subject that's moving quite that quickly to notice the focus breathing that much, but just do keep in mind that if you are planning on using this lens for video. When it comes to teleconverters, I enjoy using this lens with the 1.4. I can't really notice anything too drastic in terms of quality difference or focusing speed. I would probably say maybe focusing speed is probably the main one. It's a little slower. I don't know if that's just me, because I can see a difference because I'm so used to this lens without the teleconverter, and then when I put that 1.4 in, maybe I can notice a difference, but I don't know whether or not that would translate to you using this lens and whether or not you could notice a difference. But I do feel like it's a tiny bit slower with the 1.4 teleconverter in terms of focus and speed. Still very accurate. Quality is still good. So if you did need a lens that was over 1,000 millimeters, then obviously you can use this with the 1.4. Now with the 2x teleconverter, I probably wouldn't actively use that or shoot with it. If you needed 1,600 millimeters, there's no other way that you could get to that. So if you need that ability to shoot at 1,600 millimeters and you don't mind the fact that it's going to be quite dark, because obviously we're at f6.3 with a 2x teleconverter, so if you don't mind the fact it's going to be quite dark and you need that focal length, this is going to be the easiest way to get that. Focus speed is slower. Just keep that in mind. But let's say you're using this to take pictures of the moon, for example, or to take pictures of subjects that are in a distance, static subjects like buildings and stuff like that. In that instance, it's going to work great. But I wouldn't necessarily use this setup with a 2x teleconverter for wildlife, unless it's a larger animal at greater distances. That's when I would probably use it. I wouldn't be using this with a 2x teleconverter for a bird in flight, for example. This 800mm, I don't know if you've discovered it or not so far, but I really like it. I like it as an 800mm. I'm probably not going to use it with teleconverters because 800mm is kind of a really nice focal length. Keep in mind that my favorite focal length is around about 600, so 800 is perfectly fine for me. But for those of you that do need to use this with teleconverters, works perfectly fine with that 1.4. I will do some more in-depth stuff on that 2x because I've not used it a massive amount. I've only really been using that 1.4. I've used the 2x a couple of times. So I will do some more testing on that 2x teleconverter, compare it against the 400 2.8, and if that's something that you're interested in seeing, then do let me know. If there's any other things that you want to know about this lens, if there's anything that you want to ask about that I've not covered in this video or you can't find anywhere else, then please do let me know and I can try and get back to you guys in the comments. Hopefully you found this first look at this 800mm lens useful. If you've got any questions or if there's anything you're unsure about or if there's just anything you want to ask me in general, then please do let me know in the comments below. It's good to be back. I will see you all very soon with lots of videos. I've been hard at work and I will see you in the comments hopefully. So thank you so much for watching as always. Goodbye.